Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Welcome back to our week 2 discussion on the Maha Satipatthana Sutta. I am delighted to be here to talk about this with you guys. I put a lot of thought this week into how to present this next section because we actually have quite a bit to talk about. This is the longest individual section I think we'll wind up covering. And I wanted to just share real quick, kind of this was the outline that I put together when I started thinking about this class. And today, it's all about contemplation of the body. And technically, the first section, the Anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing in and out, is also considered part of the first section, mindfulness of the body. I think we cover a lot of things here. Mindfulness of postures, clearly comprehending what you're seeing, repulsiveness of the body, elements, and cemetery contemplations. So it's a lot of stuff. And so we might not get to it all. But also, I really do want to make it a group discussion. So as I was thinking about it, I was like, if I start sharing the suttas and reading it and saying, this is what it says, then that actually would not do you any good. At that juncture, if I was doing that, you should be noting, hearing, and just notice that you're hearing, and that's it. So what I really want to do is I want to make it to where this is a lively discussion. So I want to take a section at a time and kind of break it down. This is not me of any kind of authority, but rather together we're going to look at it a piece at a time and see what we see. And so if you see something, you can raise your hand. You can even use the raise your hand button if you want, that's in Zoom, but you can just wave at me because likely I'll be looking at you. So, but to start, I wanted to share first a section on this sutta. This is from Thanissaro Bhikkhu from the introduction, and I wanted to share this little bit. It says, at first glance, the 4 frames of reference for Satipatthana practice sound like 4 different meditation exercises. But the Satipatthana Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, number 118, makes clear that they are all centered on a single practice, keeping the breath in mind. When the mind is with the breath, all 4 frames of reference are right there. The difference simply lies in the subtlety of one's focus. It's like learning to play the piano. As you get more proficient at playing, you can also become sensitive and listening to more even subtle levels in the music. This allows you to play even more skillfully. In the same way, as the meditator gets more skilled in staying with the breath, the practice of Satipatthana gives greater sensitivity in peeling away even more subtle layers of participation in the present moment until nothing is left standing in the way of total release. So that I'm picking up where we left off, but so there we kind of have again reiteration on this practice, which we just started like really looking at last week, in the way that we become mindful of our breath and its length as it comes in and out, calming the body, calming this fabrication, and becoming aware of the body inside and out. And so as we progress now through studying these other things, I think that what I see is that the recommendation is you start practicing like this. And it's funny because a lot of times we go to, you go to maybe a specific school, or you take a meditation course, or you go off on a retreat and you get a very specific set of instructions. But when I read this and I invite discussion on this, part of what I see is that practicing with that does that. I start by noting my breath in and out and its length, but my body calms very quickly and my mind calms very quickly. And pretty soon the noting really kind of falls away and my focus changes. And as we walk through Maha Satipatthana here, I see that as part of the prescription. And yet, a lot of times as a meditator, I felt like, oh, no, I have to stay right with this practice, right with noting, in and out, in and out. But actually, he talks about how your meditation here is going to evolve. You're going to move from noting the breath into noting the body and then into noting the mind. And so it recognizes something that we all experience, which I think, we're laid out in a place where it's like, you're supposed to do it this way. And maybe my mind gets distracted or it moves to something else. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. But actually here he recommends we start with the breath. And then that's going to move into some other study of other things. Does that make sense to everybody? Are you experiencing kind of that? Can you see that kind of same thing with me? Does that sort of make sense? Because you see what I'm saying is it's like, rather than saying, oh, I have to rigidly be doing this practice, this recognizes that your meditation session is going to change as it goes. So with that said, I'll share the next section and we'll pick it up and see where we are. So this was the part we read last about training on the breath. And it says, in this way, he remains focused internally on the body in and of itself, or externally on the body in and of itself, or both internally and externally on the body in and of itself. Or he remains focused on the phenomena of origination with regard to the body, on the phenomena of passing away with regard to the body, or on the phenomena of origination and passing away with regard to the body, or his mindfulness that there is a body is maintained to the extent of knowledge and remembrance, and he remains independent, unsustained, not clinging to anything in this world. This is how a monk remains focused in and of the body of itself. That's a lot of stuff in this one paragraph. I feel like this one, when I read it, I feel like I need to stop and digest each piece a little bit. And what I see here is a few things. First, he's saying, yes, you're remaining focused on the body and what it's doing internally and externally. But then very importantly, the second part here is really recognizing the changes in the body, that the body originates, comes into being, and then passes away, just like the breath. And that when you gain that, you recognize that phenomena of originating and passing away, you also just develop this mindfulness. There is, in fact, a body here. It is, and you maintain knowledge and remembrance that it exists, and you are here looking at it. And you remain unsustained anything in the world. So this is, again, we develop our concentration with the breath. We come into our remembrance of the body and really looking at the body and begin to kind of study how it arises and passes away. And for me, for one, I can see arising and passing away in a breath. I can see arising and passing away in, just obviously changes in the body over time. We get sick, we get better, we grow old, we have all these different experiences. Your hair gets a little gray. And we all have this similar kind of a thing happening. So we can see that directly as we look at it. Anybody want to comment? Invite some thought? We're all right so far? All right, well, I'll just keep going. So now moving into really the looking at the next section in contemplating the body, we start talking about postures. And so this section, furthermore, when walking, the monk discerns I am walking. When standing, the monk discerns I am standing. When sitting, the monk discerns I am sitting. When lying down, he discerns I am lying down. Or however his body is disposed, that is how he discerns it. In this way, he remains focused internally on the body in and of itself, and externally in and on the body of itself, unsustained by anything in the world. And I'll note the little abbreviation here in the sutta. It does repeat because it is an oral tradition, just like this top section here says, there's a body maintained to the extent knowledge, or I'm sorry, no, this is the focused internally and externally, unsustained by anything in the world. And that is the same as what we see up top. Where is it? Anyways, it's just abbreviated. I just wanted to make that point. But here we talk about postures. And postures are an important part of what we do here in the Sayadaw tradition. And this kind of demonstrates, again, how this tradition is rooted in this sutta. that this is what we do. We're noting when I'm walking, I'm walking, standing, I'm standing, becoming aware of everything the body is doing. And this is seen as both, this is not just a meditation, but also becoming conscious and mindful of course, this is the foundations of mindfulness, or the frames of reference. We're talking about what it is we're mindful of. And so here, one of the first parts with the first section is be mindful of every posture that you're in, not just whether you're sitting, not just whether you're walking, but whatever you're doing, being mindful of doing that. Now, if you've been to any of the retreats where sometimes one of the monks will come from Thailand and they'll give real detailed instruction on the noting, like noting as your foot is rising, lifting, moving, stepping, noting the points on the body as you're doing that. There are several points to just become aware of, and increasing that mindfulness. And often when we're doing meditation in the hall, we'll be noting, just even as we're like raising, touching, and we'll be noting every movement involved in a bow to start this meditation too. So I reached out to Ajahn Brian yesterday and I said, hey, we're going to be talking about this. Is there anything you'd like to point out? And he said, I think I'd just like to point out that, yes, this is, this shows how our tradition really is trying to elaborate on this very practice. And it's part of noting everything you're ever doing. But also, he specifically wanted to point out lying down. He says, we joke about that when we're on retreat or something, like, oh, I'm going to do lying down practice, and we go take a nap. But truly, that is a thing to be conscious of. When you go to bed at night, I'm sitting, I'm lying down, what's your body doing? And we're increasing the number of places, I think, where we're making contact with what we're actually doing, with what's physically happening, not just what's going on in our head or what we're thinking about. We're just making contact. We're looking for a second at what we're actually doing. Thoughts on that? Got a few nods. So I think you're following along on that. We agree with that. Okay. So let's continue a little bit. And it says, furthermore, when going forward and returning, he makes himself fully alert. When looking toward and looking away, when bending and extending his lips, when carrying his outer cloak, his upper robe, his bowl, when eating, drinking, chewing, savoring, when urinating and defecating, when walking, standing, sitting, falling asleep, waking up, talking, and remaining silent, he makes himself fully alert. So when we go on retreat, we'll develop noble silence, and we'll develop this practice of really paying attention to our movements. When we eat, we're eating mindfully. If you come to lunch at the Hermitage, then you'll find that the monks sit in silence and they eat in silence, and it's a meditation for them. So it's a part of what we do when we're there. But again, this point, I think, goes to, we've moved from the meditation practice of sitting that I think maybe a lot of people imagine in the world when they're talking about meditation. They talk about, they have some newcomers to meditation might say, oh, how does this work? And it's like, you say, you sit, do I have to sit with my legs crossed? A lot of questions when you're starting. But here he teaches a really simple, always with you concentration with your breath that you can do to sit and calm your body and calm your mind. And then he tells you to go look at what you're doing all the time. So it's never, ever a recommendation of go off into the hills and just sit. It's a recommendation of cultivating in your life as you walk along and paying attention to what I'm doing. If I'm at the office and my boss aggravates me, I might note that aggravation. If I'm climbing a ladder, I might pay really close attention to climbing. And as you develop that skill of paying attention and noting what you're doing, pretty soon your mind's very precise at what it's doing. It's looking at where you are and what you're doing. It's not wandering off. So this is a recommendation of following the body all the time in life, not just on a cushion, not just quietly in the temple. Does that make sense? Would you all
Yes.
agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's present in this teaching.
Yeah.
In this way, remains focused internally on the body in and of itself, or focused externally on the body itself, unsustained by anything in the world. This is how a monk remains in the body in and of itself. Furthermore, and I have a visual aid. I'll read this and I'll share my visual aid. Okay. So, furthermore, just as a sack with openings at both ends were full of various kinds of grain, wheat, rice, mung beans, kidney beans, sesame seeds, husked rice, and the man with good eyesight pouring it out would reflect, this is wheat, this is rice, these are mung beans, these are kidney beans, these are sesame seeds, this is husked rice. In just the same way, monk reflects on the very body from the soles of the feet on up to the crown of the head on down, surrounded by skin and full of various kinds of unclean things. In this body, there are head hairs, body hairs, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, tendons, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, pleura, spleen, lungs, large intestines, small intestines, feces, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, skin, oil, saliva, mucus, fluid in the joints, and urine. Did I share that right? Did you guys get to look at a nice picture of beans while I did that?
Yes.
Because we talk about that, and it's a good example. Because there it is, bag of beans, right? And you are a bag of beans. You got some things going on in you. We all have those things, and most of the time, out of fear, we're repulsed when we see that stuff. You see, if you really see somebody's guts hanging out, it's gross. It's not a happy little pretty package. We like to dress it up, perfume it up nice, put it in a pretty package. But the truth is, what we have here is a body. It's physical matter. It's biology. It breaks down just as sure as the roast in your fridge that's been there too long does. And so it gets gross. And you have all of these things are in fact happening, and they're here. So let's take a second as a group and just think about that. Just quietly reflect on that for a minute. I'll have to keep 1 minute time. Take a minute and reflect on those parts of your body, starting from the top of your head. Just scan down to the soles of your feet, but don't exclude anything. Look at all the gross parts for just 1 minute. 1 minute. We carry this around with us everywhere. It's the one thing that's always present. You've got your bad breath will go with you, and it's always there, and yet we never really think about it, do we? We never actually put any real thought into the physical matter that we're carrying around. So that first part, remembrance enough that there is a body, that it does exist, it is moving around. But he pushes that a little further. And he says, no, pay closer attention. And I think that there's good reasons for that. I think if you start doing that, you realize how much of our time our mind spends on any other thing other than what's happening here that is kind of a gross physical biological change. And certainly we come into contact with something gross, like something rotting in your fridge or in your garbage, and we're repulsed right away, and our mind jumps around a little. But there's really not anything different between the decaying matter in your compost and your thing that you washed off in the shower this morning. It still is earth. It still has these same things going on, and it's important to kind of recognize that's what's happening there. That makes sense? We're all following along? I think so. So I'm going to keep going. Anybody got anything to say? Please, by all means. So again, in this way, you remain focused internally on the body in and of itself. Focus externally on the body in and of itself, unsustained by anything in the world. Furthermore, just as a skilled butcher or his apprentice, having killed a cow, would sit at a crossroads cutting it up into pieces, the monk contemplates this very body, however it stands, however it's disposed, in terms of its properties. In this body, there's the earth property, the liquid property, the fired property, and the wind property. In this way, he remains focused internally and externally. So, that may be a little confusing. We make kind of a big jump there, but this is something that is probably much more matter of fact to the Buddha's time to mention it this way. But let's go back to our organs. So we are looking at your body, and there is a fluid property to that, a liquid property that moves. Your blood, your tears, all the different bodily fluids that we have, there's a fluid property there. Do we agree on that? Something juicy going on. If you open it up, you'd really rather not, but something juicy going on inside. Okay, so there's that. There's also things that are not fluid, that are made of earth element. So, for example, your skin, right? Your skin and your hairs. Is this not made out of the exact same stuff that the dirt's made of? In fact, they say dust is mostly like human dander, right? So it is true to say that this is as much earth as the dirt outside. Sitting with LP one day, and he's picking at his skin on his hand. And he's just picking at this little piece of dry skin. And he looks at me and he goes, earth. And he throws it away. And that's exactly right. You know, ashes, dust, dust. It is true to say that there is an earth element here, that there is definitely a fluid element here. Anybody question whether there's a wind element? We're noting the breath as it comes in and out, right? But you've got gaseous movement in your body, of course. Everybody passes gas and does that too. That's true and happens as part of what this body is doing, for real, for everybody. It is, there are gases built up in our body, and when we die, it becomes bloated because those gases don't escape. So we face that because that is factually accurate. So now we've looked at, there's a wind element, there's an earth element, there's a fluid element. What is your body's temperature? Are you at 98.6 right now? Do you maybe have a fever? So there's definitely a thing happening in your body that's generating some kind of physical energy or fire element, right? You definitely have something heating and cooling that body. If someone dies, they turn cold when all that stops. But as you digest your food and produce energy from it, you definitely heat. Your body will warm up. If you started running, you'd sweat because your body'd get hot, right? So we can see that our body is made up of these different parts. We can see that we definitely have in us this movement of organs and stuff. And when that stuff is moving, we can see it happening if we're paying attention, whether we're standing or sitting or whatever we're doing. You know, we have some experience of that. Same thing. He talks about when urinating and defecating. Yep, you're mindful. You're paying attention to what your body's doing. If you're not paying attention to what your body's doing, what are you doing? If you're not paying attention to what your body's doing at those moments, your mind's off someplace else. So it isn't present to where you are. That's true. So we don't like to talk about it. So that's uki. Think about sitting on the toilet. But the truth is, it's something we all do. It's a movement of this physical body. It's a movement of the elements coming and going. You ate some food, you digested it, there's a result. That's true for everybody, and that's what's actually happening. So why be afraid or ashamed or look at that weird? Why would there then be some other thing connected to that? So for this purpose, we've developed just this mindfulness that this is what's happening physically. So far, that's where we're at. Any thoughts on that? We've looked at and we've got the elements. We've contemplated the elements. So those organs that you have, that blood that you have, that we scanned in our body, that is connected to elements just the same as everything else in the world, right? Just the same as the tree is going to shed its leaves and those leaves are going to rot. You have parts on you that you will shed and they will rot. And that's just true. So far, so good? All right. So now we get to the deepest, darkest part of the contemplation of the body. Furthermore, as if one were to see a corpse cast away in the charnel ground. And a note here, what is a charnel ground? So in traditional India, rather than burying bodies, they had large grounds, pits, where they would stack them. And then they would decay with the elements like all the things. And so birds will come and pick them apart. The elements will come and pick them apart, and that is how they would dispose traditionally of bodies, and I understand still do in some places. So, just as if you were to see a corpse cast away in the charnel ground, 1, 2, or 3 days dead, bloated, livid, and festering, he applies it to this very body. This body, too, such is its nature, such is its future, such is its unavoidable fate. We all will experience that. All of us will have this body. I'm going to stop right there for just a second. This is a hard one. This is a tough Buddhist meditation, but it's here in the Maha Satipatthana Sutta. It was as important to him as in and out breathing. Notice the phenomena of change in your body. That it came from dirt, it will become dirt. That is a part of this human experience for all of us, and a recognizable fact that we will all have that experience, and we don't like to think about it. We don't like to actually contemplate this body in those states of decay. So this can be a little triggering. So I'm just saying that right now as we move on to this next section, because he's saying very specifically, don't be afraid of that. Don't let your mind wander on that. Just see what's happening. Same as you were watching yourself poop a minute ago. Pay attention to how the body will what's actually happening, because it's fundamentally true. Or again, as if you were to see a corpse cast away in the charnel ground, picked at by crows, vultures, and hawks, by dogs, hyenas, and other various creatures. A skeleton smeared with flesh and blood, connected with tendons. A fleshless skeleton smeared with blood, connected with tendons. A skeleton without flesh or blood, connected with tendons. Bones detached from their tendons, scattered in all directions. Here a hand bone, there a foot bone, here a shin bone, there a thigh bone, here a hip bone, there a backbone, here a rib, there a breastbone, here a shoulder bone, there a neck bone, here a jawbone, there a tooth, here a skull. The bones whitened, somewhat like the color of shells, piled up, more than a year old, decomposed into powder. He applies it to this very body. This body, too, such is its nature, such is its future, such is its unavoidable fate. Want to go back to the breathing meditation? Maybe go back to the breathing. So it's a recognizable fact that we'll all have this experience. And when we note that phenomena, we see a couple of things really deeply. One, you aren't separate from the earth. You are, you are right there, part of it. And even as your heart beats now, it's made of proteins. Those proteins are made of a complicated process from the foods you ate. You're not disconnected from those things. You aren't separate from them. And the other phenomena you'll see is that it all shifts and changes. Like we want it to not. We cling to it not, right? We don't want that. There's an uncomfortable thing that comes from sitting in a charnel ground. Monks will go do that. They'll go sit in the charnel ground. They'll sit amongst the corpses and see the varying stages of decay. To accept this too will happen to me. This too is my fate. It can't be avoided. Now, this is also part 2 as we look at the cure to suffering. You know, the cure to suffering, the answer to that thing. We look at and we see these difficult to look at things, and we recognize them as not anything to be terrified of, but rather a part of the natural world that we're part of. And we become connected to it instead of separate from it. We start to understand it a little more deeply, start to appreciate it in a different way, and start to recognize if we're not present to that most fundamental thing of our body, what are we present to? What are we doing instead? If you're not paying attention to this most fundamental thing that we carry everywhere we go. And I think for today, I'm going to leave it right there. I think that's enough stuff to look at. We've looked all the way to the cemetery meditations. So I would like to open it up for more discussion. I really would like to get some more lively interaction. But there we have examined in brief. We started with our breath and recognizing there's a thing happening. We turned that concentration into seeing that, yep, we have a body and it's here. And then we looked from the top of our head to the soles of our feet and kind of recognized the physical thing that's happening. We saw that we're made of organs and stuff and gooey stuff and other stuff. And we talked about then how that's tied to the elements. And we looked at the elements. And then finally, we look at the fact that all of those things, all those pieces, as they're tied to the elements, face decay and break down, and they will one day be dust. So that is the essence of body meditation in the Satipatthana Sutta. And with that, I conclude and open up to any questions, thoughts, or discussion.
I'll start. Thank you, by the way. And I want that part of me is smiling through this whole thing. And it's a funny, maybe disjointed thing, but that I need to look at. But I grew up on a farm. I still keep animals. And I still grow a garden, not the size of what, what my family did. They were subsistence. And one of the songs that we as kids used to sing, I don't know if it's familiar to anybody else, was a song about decomposition. Frankly, it was the worms go in, the worms go out, the worms go in and around your snout. It was about decompose, you know what I mean? And I even in my childhood knew of funerals that were where they were just wrapped in a cloth and dropped into the ground to decompose. So that concept, it's not unfamiliar to me. And when I was reading one of the books that the monks gave me a while back on this section, and it gets very, it's another one of those that used to bother me that I was reading so much of the oral tradition was so dramatic, it was kind of hard for me to read. Well, this one is very dramatic, as what you just taught us too. And the lesson there, I think, is something about then pay attention. This is what is, right? I mean, I don't know, right or wrong.
I would agree. Yeah,
that this is a part of why some of the readings are so dramatic and so gory. I mean, really gory, like, wow, they'd have a hard time putting that one in a movie, type gore, or at least my imagination does, maybe. But that's another one of those listen up. I hear it as a listen up. This is powerful. This is the message. This is what happened. This is, I guess, is the message. Yeah. And so I kind of, for the first time in some of these readings, have almost enjoyed reading it. So I guess maybe I'm becoming more of a listener that we would have listened to the oral tradition stories in the past, that I'm becoming more able to sit with and listen. You know, some months ago, it just irked me, something terrible, to read all the drama and just say the words over and over and over again. So I guess part of my smile has to do with, I think I've shifted a bit with this. Thank you.
No, it's great input. Thank you.
And
Thanks.
huh?
That's great input. Thank you.
Yeah, that's just kind of how I saw this part of the lessons. Yeah.
It can be tricky to confront this at all. You know, we do so much avoiding of these thoughts, and yet, you know, it is, like I say, it's something we carry everywhere we go. So it's part of the deal. Chris, you look like you're gonna say something. What you got?
Yeah, weirdly enough, I had a conversation last night briefly that was touched on this topic. And that was a friend of mine his father was in film production and had worked with special effects people. And it's an interesting thing when you talk about how averse we are, just in the human condition, we are averse to the gory details of our material existence. And one of the interesting things is, in all these violent action movies and horror movies, they actually have to make the gore effects a few steps removed from what it would really look like. Right, because that's the fine line between like really horrifying and entertaining in a strange way. It's like because when you I think one of the great special effects guys, Tom Savini, had been a war photographer during Vietnam, and he talked about this, like how you go see the it's like nobody wants to go to a movie and actually watch what it looks like when a human being dies. You know, they want to imagine it, but they don't want to actually see what it would really look like, because if they saw that, they would be horrified to the core.
I think that's true, and I think it's interesting. Again, like, well, I want to let everybody else talk some. I don't want to interject after every single thing, but I think that is an interesting point. I think that we avoid it a lot. So, who else? Victor, Linda?
Well, I know, I just remember, you know, Tom Bryan's touched on this a lot over the last few years when we've had our Zoom meetings. And, you know, I do think for myself, it is something that, you know, you still kind of tend to avoid. So it's actually good to kind of touch on it, you know, from time to time, and just to really, you know, not have it get too far removed from you, you know?
Yeah. Important part of paying attention.
I don't know, at my age, I'm assuming I'm as old as maybe in this group, I don't know. We get faced with it too, but in a Western way or something, you know, I get handed, is my advanced directive up to date? In other words, if I were unconscious, what are my wishes? You know, one of those things. The doctors love to have them on hand. Helps make their decisions, you know, for all those reasons. But it's a very Western thing, and all of a sudden, and as that came along, and when my husband was dying, and that we came to that then too. There was a part of me that said, oh, I don't want to even look at that. I don't even want to sign that. You know, there is that aversion. Yet when I sit and contemplate it, I can go there. So it's an interesting kind of thing that happens, but I don't know, we were able to overcome that and say that this is the right decision to make, and this is the way we want things, and that's being self-minding when you do that. But the first thing, they just kind of slam these papers at you and say, here, we want your directive. We want to know what to do with you when your body's unconscious, you know. It's an interesting thing, but at my age, you get it. If you haven't been thinking about it, you're gonna, if you're seeing any kind of medical treatment, it's very popular these days to deal with that stuff. And it's important, I think, too. I don't mean to make fun of them, but it was funny how it all of a sudden the Western Medical Society kind of caught up with that concept, but they didn't help us think about it. They just want us to sign the papers.
Right.
Oh, Oh, I'm on a Zoom, honey.
Richard, you got anything?
My granddaughter just showed up. I gotta take a second and deal with this. I'll be
No
back.
problem.
Thank
No
you.
problem. Yeah.
Let's see, I better turn
Victor,
this.
what you got?
I was on a retreat, a little weekend retreat, and it was at a St. Francis retreat center. And they also had the sisters also had a cemetery. So we talked about this part of Buddhism. But actually, when we went out into the cemetery, it was really kind of beautiful. There were deer and fawn eating at the grass, and I mean, there were certainly headstones, but it had been, as Chris was talking about, it had been kind of beautified. It was really difficult to contemplate death and dying, and really kind of a nice place. But I do have a question. When we talked about sensitivity of the body in the body, and he talks about of contemplations and formulations of the body and the body, and it always makes me think of I sometimes use my heartbeat as a point of focus, not really the breath, and that really is a function of the body. But in this sutta, or at least in this part, he talks about the physical aspects of the body.
Yes.
Do I have that right?
Yeah. The first section is about contemplation of the body. And so we start with that simple, it's interesting because we start with that breathing, right? And if you think about kind of the way we approach this meditation, I find it just sitting here listening to everybody, it's interesting because we talk about, okay, what's this technique for watching our breath? And we pay really close attention to the breath for a minute, and then something magical happens. It's not just that we've developed this technique and we're really strong at just watching the breath. It's that we're able to apply that focus to seeing what's happening in real time. And that begs the question, what were we doing before we were seeing things in real time? Right? So then we see this larger thing develop where it's like, oh, wait a minute. I'm seeing what's happening in my body, but it wasn't a minute ago. And I'm getting this now. And I'm understanding the phenomena of change. So my view is opened up. I'm seeing the bigger picture. I'm seeing how my body's changing, not just this breath, but like overall time. And then the next thing we're going to talk about is the mind and what your mind's doing. It's this whole picture that develops. We were just talking about the breath. We just talked about our guts. We just talked about the elements. And somehow we get to a point where we see changes over a long scale time, right? Like that's what becomes visible when you start looking. And one of the things you notice there, Victor, is you notice like how your focus, like the author, like Thanissaro Bhikkhu said at the start of this, where he said, we become like a musician, able to tune into more and more and more subtle aspects of the music we're playing. And so we move from seeing like just that we're breathing to we notice our heartbeat, and then we notice that the heart's beating. We can become kind of aware of the sensation of movement of blood in our body, and we can become aware that heartbeat, the heart is made of the same stuff that the table's made out of, just in a different configuration, that it's made out of molecules and meat, and it's sitting there doing what it does despite whatever I think it ought to do. It's just doing it. And that has heart element, it has heat in it, it has water in it, it has
4 elements, yeah,
all of it there. And so that's why this is a foundation of mindfulness, is because we're planning a foundation for keeping our mindfulness aware by looking at our body. So it's a frame of reference, is what he calls it here, or a foundation of mindfulness. And so the first foundation the Buddha teaches is the body. He starts there. And part of why he starts there is because it's really easy to see how this changes. It's changing now. It'll change from today to tomorrow. I can do things. I can eat the right food or not eat the right food. and I can observe physical changes, that's happening for sure. Everybody can see it. We can all agree on that. It's fundamentally true. We all can look right at it, and you have to look at it for yourself. So there sits the first foundation of mindfulness, the body. And it's given us a lot of stuff to think about. So we talk about it, we do, but he's recommending this as a regular practice. He's recommending that you consider this on a regular basis. That the next time you're in the bathroom, you're paying attention to how you're sitting, what you're doing, what's happening in your body, all the different things. And if your mind's averse to it, I heard 3 different people use the word aversion. And isn't that interesting? Because again, we're getting to the fundamental 4 noble truths about what it is that causes us to suffer. And we start by looking at this thing. Well, we suffer when we're averse. Yeah, we're suffering. So then we can look at that aversion. So the big picture starts to open up. And wow, I thought this was just in and out breathing. I thought this was simple. It's not. It gets really profound, doesn't it? So what a profound look. Yeah.
While we were contemplating death, basically, I also, and I don't know if it's part of aversion or if it's part of the learning or what, but I also was going, thus the value of life.
Right.
That the breath I have now, and how many more do I have? So it kind of, for me, it says then you only have so much time to make the right decision too. Or the right decisions, or the right choices, or the path that's right for you. So it kind of pushes me more toward that. If I'm aware, it's hard to take a wrong turn.
Well, these are the foundations of mindfulness. So there you just said, in so many words, what's arisen in you is mindfulness. That you looked at this foundation and you saw something that to be mindful of, hey, I've only got so many breaths. How am I using them? That this creates a foundation, a frame, a way for you to look at it. That is the point. So it worked. This is where I get to on these things, is when I look at it, I go, so it functions, So we're not talking about an esoteric belief system that you've got to go, do some super weirdo practice. We're talking about you developed a foundation of mindfulness. You looked right at your life and you said, here's an insight. And that happened just like it's supposed to. Yeah. So there we have it. And what a great way to conclude for today. Anybody else got anything else they want to add? I'm happy to stick around a little bit, but I suppose for now I'll share our service presentation and we'll just conclude for today. Thank you all for sharing. That all was really, I think, a good, lively discussion. Oops, wrong screen. And I'm grateful to be able to practice with you guys and evaluate this together, because it helps my practice and I hope it helps yours too. Oh. Okay, this is the one here. So together we'll reflect on universal well-being. May we abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may we maintain well-being in ourselves. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all beings be released from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their action and inherit its results. Their future is born from such action, companion to such action, and its results will be their home. All actions with intention, be they skillful or harmful, of such acts they will be the heirs. We'll conclude with a salutation to the triple gem. Araham Sama Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivademi. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami. Supatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho sangham namami. Invite you guys to read through that stuff more this week and take another closer look. And pick up next week. We'll pick up there and chime in briefly about the bite. Tell me anything you've learned. So I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next
Pete,
time.
before we go,
Yeah.
I was going to say, there was a moment, I had a brief, like this last week in my morning meditation, which I usually get up and do long before everybody else does. I did have a couple of moments where I saw myself actually observing my breath as an observer instead of sitting here like trying to manipulate the outcome. Right? If it makes any sense, like I was getting that part where it's like, and the disciple notes he has a long breath, and it's like, oh look, here I am, I'm having a long breath, you know.
Yeah.
And just like, you know, it's like it was like, well, what's the breath going to be next? And kind of let the body make the determination.
I think that's the magic of doing it this way, of noting long and short, is you can't really get ahead of it.
No,
you know, you've just got to notice what just happened or what is happening, not really what you think is going to happen. Right,
exactly. And what I found, and it's been it has been a long standing frustration in the practice for me, but it's not like a end of the world kind of thing. It's just like, how do you, when you want to settle into the observation of the breath, and we've all, I think, had this experience, you want to settle into the observation of the breath, and yet there's that sort of Heisenberg uncertainty principle element of it. Like, when does the observer start dictating the breath?
Right. Right. And yeah, when you're controlling the breath and agitation that arises from not doing it right.
Right.
And that's kind of what my observation was earlier, was that it's that built into this. I mean, we're doing cemetery contemplations, so you're not just watching your breath, You've developed that concentration watching the breath so that you can use it on these other things, and you're using it all the time, no matter what you're doing. You're using that same level of concentration that you developed with the breath. That's what he alludes to. So for a lot of people, I think it gets confusing when they start meditating. They're like, I'm doing the breath, but I don't know if I'm doing right, because my mind wandered and I started thinking about the cemetery contemplations. Right. Well, yeah. Or my mind, Victor points it out, my mind went to my heart. My mind wandered to my heart. So your mind changes, it shifts. And so to simply say I'm doing this wrong because I wasn't perfectly noting it the entire time is a misunderstanding of the instruction, I think. Yeah. But anyway. All right. Nice to visit with you all. Anybody wants to stick around, I'll stick around a little longer. But you all have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye for now. Satu.